Yeah, a lot of people are talking about this. Should you need a vaccine passport to go to a restaurant or a concert or travel to other parts of Canada? Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said yesterday, Tuesday, it was up to provinces to decide whether proof of immunization should be required within their borders. So the question we're asking, should vaccine passports be federally mandated? And we already have our audience members chiming in on social media, including from Nicole on Facebook, who says, the vaccine doesn't mean you can't catch or transmit COVID, making the passport useless. What do you think?
Oh, that's an interesting perspective. Allie on Twitter has a different perspective. She says, you may have the right to not vaccinate, but I also have the right to make an informed choice about where I bring my family. If I can't be sure, I'm not risking my children who can't be vaccinated yet. And Allie, I hear you. I think every single parent is thinking about the implications of this, especially come September. Right now, as far as I know, there's no requirement that teachers or caregivers have to be vaccinated in order to look after kids. And this is an ongoing concern. But I have to say, I mean, a part of me, even though I like this idea, when you do start doing a bit of a deep dive, it kind of falls a little bit apart. Do you know what I mean? Let me give you one example. I'll give you one example, which is that, because this is provincial, and so, let's say, for example, Manitoba, which I believe has vaccine passports right now, or it looks like it's going to. Let's say they have a massive outbreak, and a whole bunch of Manitobans come over to another province like Ontario that has no vaccine passport. Are you going to then run the risk of anybody who is a vulnerable citizen having a huge uptick? That's yet one example of maybe a problem that hasn't been thought out very well.
Cynthia, I'm trying to wrap my head around that, and I'm also trying to wrap my head around the fact that Trudeau wants to work with the provinces to create an internationally accepted proof of vaccination for international travel. Yet he's leaving the details to each provincial government. That's not going to end well. Do you know what I mean?
I think that's for their domestic, for example, businesses, theaters, concerts, going into retail. I think that's what he was talking about provinces domestically within their own borders creating their own. I think that was my understanding anyway.
So that's separate from the international thing.
I have questions about enforcement that my mind went to sort of movie theaters, an example. First of all, I think movie theaters in many provinces are starting to open up, and there are no vaccine passports in, for example, Ontario. But let's just say we were to implement one. You've had a lag of time where there has been no requirement. Suddenly, if there's a shift, that's going to cause confusion. And then the poor, minimum wage teenage workers there, how are they going to be responsible for enforcing this? We've heard horrible stories out of the U.S. of young workers trying to enforce masks to devastating consequences at times. So that also, I mean, you can't put that kind of weight on a minimum wage, young worker.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Those are getting down to the brass tacks of it, and that's true. I don't know how enforcement will work. Generally speaking, I think for the greater good, I can see a lot of the benefits of both an interprovincial or interprovincial vaccine passport as well as the international one. We've seen that it can be used as a tool, not so much just to gain access to things that we all love and enjoy about quote unquote normal life, which is access to restaurants, going to the mall, going to a concert, but it's also used as a public health strategy or tool. Right now, Ontario doesn't seem to be interested in using a vaccine passport, but the reasoning is interesting because our top medical doctors are saying, because we actually have a really, so far, pretty good uptake with the first and second doses. But if we hit a plateau, then what's going to happen? What happens if we have a potential fourth wave in September? Then it gets interesting. Look what's happening in France right now. Emmanuel Macron, the president, listen, they've plateaued out in France for a long time with vaccines. All of a sudden, he says Monday night, we are going to have a vaccine passport if you want to go into your favorite restaurant, your bar, et cetera, et cetera. They had record signups, 1.2 million French people, all of a sudden who were maybe vaccine hesitant, maybe didn't want it, signed up. So it was used as a public health strategy to get that vaccination level up. And with whom? The under 35 set were the number ones to sign up. Those are especially the people who are under vaccinated, who the Delta variant loves to infect. And that, guess what? That doesn't help just the under 35s. It helps all people the higher everybody has vaccination. So I'm all for it.
I get it. The passport seems almost like to operate as a convenience. The idea that it will be convenient to have one if you're traveling and you don't want to quarantine when you get home. That's like a perk. It's almost like a carrot at the end of this really ugly stick. You know, governments, the world has been telling us to get vaccinated. You know, that's sort of like the cherry on top of the end. Like, look, you get some really great conveniences. But on the flip side, there are a lot of people who are concerned sort of about privacy and personal freedom issues. And I have to admit, I get that. I get that particularly for our Indigenous peoples who may not want to give our government a single piece of personal information, who may not trust our health care. But at the same time, and I'm speaking about my own privilege here, is that when I hear about this passport, it doesn't scream surveillance state for me. Like the idea of the government knowing that I've had 2 doses, or a maitre d' knowing that I have 2 doses. The maitre d' has my visa, you know, like, so I don't care.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, also, it's interesting to think about the motivation factor. Mel, you were just talking about this idea that the passports as a public health strategy. I was listening to something recently. It was a podcast, and they were talking about vaccine strategies. And one of the strategies that is apparently a very good one for just human psychology is the example of scarcity. So in a place like the U.S., for example, where they are very well aware that they have a surplus of vaccines, if that government, or if the government was to say something like, you have until the end of October to get your vaccine, otherwise we're offloading our surplus to a country that is more in need. And actually, that would probably be a very good idea. Apparently, psychologically, most people will then be more motivated to get it because they feel like it's going to disappear. The window is going to close. So that might be another strategy.
I hear you. Ethically, I don't think they can do it, but I totally understand that.
I have, and like you, Cynthia, I have questions about enforcement. And, you know, my mind goes to my teenage days when we tried to get into the club and some of us had fake IDs. So how do they enforce like a fraudulent vaccine passport situation? Like right now, what I consider to be my vaccine passport is this thing that like the province emailed to me after my second shot that has my name and like the shot that I got and on what date. But you just hit print on your printer and it's like a regular piece of paper with like, you can easily recreate that. So I don't know, like with digital printing these days, I don't think it's that hard to create a fake passport. And I don't know how that's going to work either.
I do. I don't think it's going to be easy. I get what you're saying because P.S. I might have tried that to get into the club when I was 16. So it's possible. But I think back then what we didn't have was this digital aspect to it, which does bring up the point that you brought up, Jess, which is hacking. Everyone who's getting vaccinated, you are in your provincial database. All your information is there. So it's about creating a digital passport, perhaps more so than like old school paper or a card, although that might be a possibility too.
That's also assuming that everyone has access to like a smartphone to carry around, which not everyone does.
To go back to Cynthia's movie example then, so is someone making minimum wage holding a scanner and scanning your card? And is that like, does that like delay the process of everything, number one? Like imagine at a concert or whatever, so you scan your ticket plus you have to scan your passport. And number two, do I want the restaurant or the movie theater somehow having access? Like it's one thing for the government to have access to my medical records, but I don't know, do I want my favorite Italian restaurant to have access to my medical records? I'm not sure.
Again, like, that's something that doesn't bother me.
But then does that mean that you get to go where everybody else goes who is willing to prove that they're vaccinated if you could potentially be sick? Like there's a bigger question beyond you. That's what public health is all about.